Hey everyone, Kendrick here. Over the last couple of weeks and months, I've been playing more and more Arena in Hearthstone. And let me tell you this, being successful in it is a lot harder than many may think. The most important thing I realized after spending quite a bit of time in there is that the arena often has its own rules and mechanics compared to constructed play. This is not about how the cards or hero classes work, of course, but rather about your strategy and game mechanics. In Constructed, you ideally possess an elaborate plan about how you want your deck to perform. For example, you've made an aggro deck to rush your opponent down as quickly as possible. In the Arena, on the other hand, you can't have as much impact on your deck as in Constructed, since you won't know which drafts are gonna happen. This is the reason why you have to adapt to a slightly different kind of playstyle in the Arena. That does not mean, however, that you can improve your Constructed performance by playing Arena and vice versa. The most important and most frequently used terms that you will come across when talking about the Arena will be value and board control. Which leads us to the topic I want to talk about in this video, the so-called 2 golden rules of the Arena, as I would like to call it. So let's get straight to the nitty-gritty and talk about my rule number 1. Don't be greedy, trade minions before attacking your opponent's HP to gain and maintain board control. This rule is something that a lot of players tend to forget, especially after their opponent has dropped in HP quite a bit. I know it's tempting to finish off your opponent as quickly as possible, but in the Arena, one card, like the Mind Control tech or a Flame Strike for instance, is often enough to entirely change the momentum of the game. It happens quite often that I got beaten by someone who was already below 10 HP simply due to the fact that I could not keep up with the pressure and he managed to stabilize and eventually overwhelm me with minion force. I always like to think back to StarCraft 2, where a lot of casters repeated a very important principle. If you're ahead, don't start gambling. Try to get even further ahead instead until you reach a point where it becomes impossible to lose. I think this can also apply to Hearthstone's Arena, where getting ahead means establishing board control by winning cost-efficient minion trades. Let me show you 2 examples of what that means. In the first scenario, we trade a 1 mana drop with 2 attack against a 2 mana drop with 2 health, or even a 3 to 4 mana drop with 2 health. That's why cards like the Bluegill Warrior or the Wargate Infiltrator have become popular amongst many experienced Arena players. In the second scenario, we ignore our opponent's HP and decide to crush our opponent's weaker minion with the Boulder Fist Ogre. With the Ogre still being on the board, our opponent will be forced to invest another card to finish it off. Thus, our Ogre traded 2 for 1 or sometimes even 3 for 1, which is cost efficiency at its best and normally way better than dealing 6 damage to our opponent's face. An important fact that you must never forget is the remaining number of cards in your opponent's hand. The smaller it gets, the more you might want to try to finish off your opponent, because the amount of countermeasures to deal with your minions at his disposal diminishes as well. Same goes for your own amount of cards. If you start falling behind in cards and don't have cards in your deck like the Rogue's Sprint ability or the Druid's Nourish spell, rushing down your opponent is often the only way to win because you simply wouldn't be able to catch up in the late game. So as you can see, sometimes attacking your opponent's HP can be better, but normally that is not the case. Alright, so let's take a look at some in-game examples to repeat what we just found out, shall we? In our first example, my opponent summons a Bluegill Warrior, which is a quite good 2-drop in the Arena and could be used to get rid of my weakened minion there. Instead, he decides to charge it right into myself, ignoring the fact that there's also a Raging Worgen on the board. If he had followed the golden rule number 1, he would have been in a way better position after ending this turn. In the second example, we can see a common mistake being made by many players who use the Wargate Infiltrator. Again, a very good Arena card since it can snipe 3/2 minions like a Fairy Dragon or a Knife Juggler, while not getting targeted because of its stealth ability, which is really good. But instead, my opponent decides to go after my HP and obviously values dealing 2 damage to my health higher than potentially killing a 3/2 minion. A deadly mistake, as you can see now in the unfolding turn of events.
We must cleanse the Sunwell.
Third example. My opponent has a clear numbers advantage on the board and decides to ignore my Farseer. A mistake, because trading a Fairy Dragon for a Farseer would have been a decent bargain and he would have extended his board control even further, especially when taking a look at how many cards I still had at my disposal. And even though the Mind Control tag took his weakest link, I still managed to retaliate cost efficiently with the Farseer, taking out 2 minions of his and securing the momentum on my side for now. In our next demo, I'm using a Frost Elemental to freeze my opponent's Sea Giant and thus slow down his attack. After getting rid of his champion of the arena very cost efficiently and increasing my presence on the board by playing a Wolf Rider, the minion count is now 4 to 1. I now take the risk and attack his HP directly because none of my minions could trade 1-for-1 against the big giant. In return, he manages to kill my Wolf Rider, but decides to ignore my Frost Elemental, which he could have taken down easily with his beefy Sea Giant. I would have been forced to sacrifice at least 2 more cards to get rid of it, since none of my current minions would have been strong enough to finish him after that. Ignoring my strongest minion here, the Frost Elemental proved to be a fatal error, especially when considering the amount of cards I still had left in my hand. This cost him the game in the end. So now that we talked about how to trade your minions in general, it's time to move on to golden rule number 2. When trading minions and establishing board control, try to be cost efficient. Try to keep as many minions alive at the same time as possible. This rule had already been mentioned before when we were talking about the Boulder Fist Ogre and trading it against as many hostile minions as possible. But we can extend this rule a little bit further and make it apply to weapon and damaging spells as well. Try to use those cards prior to damaging your minions. That means it is in general better to use a spell like Fireball or Lava Burst to kill a minion than sacrificing 1 or 2 of your own creatures and waste a spell on your enemy's HP. Same goes for weapons. Unless you're really close to dying, losing some of your own HP to kill enemy minions is always a good trade, as it saves your own ones from dying and taking heavy damage. These steps will ensure you're gonna get the advantage on the board. But enough talking, let's move on and watch 2 more video examples. In the first video, I'm using my weapon, the Rogue's Wicked Knife, to keep my minions from taking damage and increase my own minion count to 3 to 0. Unless my opponent has some AoE spells in his hand, he's quite behind at this stage of the game. In the second example, I used the Priest's Hero skill to damage my opponent's minions before attacking it with my own. After that, I use Shadow Games, a very powerful spell that takes control over one of his minions with 3 attack or lower, basically for the same reason. So long story short, I try to make my Organized Soul Priest survive at any cost, especially since it has a precious passive effect that I don't want to lose. By the way, you probably noticed that my opponent also violated golden rule number 1 and attacked my HP directly because he thought himself safe behind his taunt minion. Once again, this was way too reckless, especially considering the amount of cards left in my hand. Alright, now that we're approaching the end of the video, I'd like to add that the 2 golden rules don't always apply. Sometimes you know it's better to finish off your opponent when you have a solid plan according to the cards in your deck and in your hand. There is no bulletproof way to win every single match in the arena, but if you keep these 2 rules in mind, I'm sure your overall performance and results will increase. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'd love to hear about your own ideas and experience about the arena, so feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please make sure to visit ihearthyou.com for additional videos, guides, and articles. Trust me, you won't regret it. Take care everyone, and good luck in your next arena runs.